Aravind Eye Hospital, Tirunelveli welcomes you all to the third session of webinar series on ophthalmic imaging. Today, we have eminent speakers and experienced VO surgeons on board to discuss about the various investigative modalities which are used in vitreoretinal specialty. I request all the participants to mute your mic while during the presentation and also post your queries in the chat box. We have a 1.5 hour long session and we'll address your queries and questions at the end of the session. And also I request all the speakers to not to disconnect in between the session and also to stick on to the time. With this, I introduce our first speaker, Dr. Sunil, who is Assistant Professor of Ophthalmology in Regional Institute of Ophthalmology, Trivandrum. He finished his MBBS from Government Alape Medical College and did his MS from RIO Trivandrum. He had a long stint in Aravind Eye Hospital, Tirunelveli. He's a very good friend of us, and he's a very experienced surgeon and also a good teacher. Over to you, sir. He will be speaking about angiography in ophthalmology. Over to Dr. Sunil.
Thank you, Syed, for that introduction. I think I will go directly to the topic because there are two topics given to me, fluorescent angiogram and ICG. I think I will just go a little bit fast so that I can cover these topic. You know, fluorescence is the property of certain molecules to emit light energy of longer wavelength when stimulated by a light of shorter wavelength. Sodium fluorescein is the dye used. It absorbs blue light and emits green light. We generally use the ML 20% solution given in the cubital vein, and then serial photographs are taken at 1 second interval between 5 and 25 seconds after the injection. Late photographs are taken 10 minutes after the injection. Late means 10 minutes after the injection. 80% of this fluorescent molecule fluorescein is plasma protein bound and it's not available for fluorescence. Only 20% the unbound fluorescein is responsible for the fluorescence seen during the angiographic procedure. Mind you, only 20% of this is available for fluorescence. But the property of fluorescence of this molecule is very high. That is why we are able to see the good fluorescence, even though it's only 20% available. In a retina camera, you see this blue light, the white light which enters the eye, which is released, and this blue excitation filter allows the blue light to enter into the eye, which stimulates the fluorescent molecule, which emits the green light, and little bit of blue light also comes back, which is blocked. This blue light is blocked by the barrier filter, which allows only the green filter to go into the camera. That's why it's taken. Normal fluorescent angiogram has got an choroidal phase, an arterial phase, an early arteriovenous phase, late arteriovenous phase, recirculation phase, and a late phase. After you inject dye into the cubital vein, 10 to 12 seconds after that, the dye will appear in the choroidal phase. Initially, it is faint choroidal flush will be seen. Later, a patchy choroidal filling will be seen. This is the choroidal flush that you see here in the photograph. The faint white color of the fundus. 1 to 3 seconds after the choroidal fluorescence, the artery gets filled, and from the central retinal artery, the dye goes to the arteriole, capillary, and venules. So you can see that dye has come into the artery. From there, it goes into the periphery, coming into the venule. So it has gone into the venules now. From the venules, the early arterial phase starts, early arteriovenous phase starts. The fluorescent molecule in the venules now enters the veins along their walls. That is called a laminar flow. With time, the lamina will become thicker and thicker, and wherever there are two veins joining, you may even see the trilaminar flow. Here you can see the dye has gone through the artery into the venule. From the venule, it goes along into the veins. A laminar flow has started now. Now the laminar flow is increasing, and now it is again reaching up to the laminar flow is reaching up to the disc. So this is laminar flow. That is the early arteriovenous phase. Wherever I was just telling you, wherever the two veins join, you may even see the trilaminar flow in these vessels. Late arteriovenous phase, the dye completely fills the lumen of the vein. You mind you, the artery, it enters into the artery. It enters into the artery around 1 to 3 seconds after it comes to the choroid. So around 15 seconds comes to the artery, and then it completely fills the vein by around 25 seconds. So there is a arteriovenous transit time of around 8 to 12 seconds. So this is this stage is the stage where the dye completely fills the lumen of the vein. Remember, this is the stage at which you should look at it. If you want to look at the perifoveal capillary network, it should be visualized in the late arteriovenous phase, because this is the phase where the concentration dye is maximum there. So this is late arteriovenous phase, where the dye completely fills the lumen of the vein. So these, you see the fovea will always be hypofluorescent, because you know there is no artery, there is retinal vessel which is over the fovea, and also the tall RP cells which contain pigments is blocking the normal choroidal flush to be visualized in the visualized through the fovea, so that the fovea will always be hypofluorescent. Now, next stage is the recirculation phase. It begins about 30 seconds after the dye injections. Here, the fluorescence within the vessel decreases, and because the decreased concentration of the fluorescein molecule available. So that is the recirculation phase. Late phase means the dye is completely going out of the vessel, and by around 10 minutes after the injection, the retinal vessel is almost empty of fluorescein. There will be a marked reduction in the intensity of the fluorescence during the late phase of the angiogram. During the late phase of the angiogram, you also see some staining of the sclera, and some disc will also be getting stained, because the connective tissue around disc will also get stained in these late phases. So this is the late phase. You can see the fluorescence in the vessel is almost not there. Normally, the arm to choroid time is around 10 to 15 seconds, and the complete choroidal filling occurs by around 3 to 5 seconds, and AV transit time is around 8 to 12 seconds. To understand the fluorescent angiogram, you should know what is this type, these type of fluorescence. One is hypofluorescence and another is hyperfluorescence. Hypofluorescence may be blocked retinal and choroidal fluorescence. Look at this picture. This patient is having pre-retinal bleed, which blocks the retinal vessel and the choroid. Here there is a small subretinal bleed, which is blocking only the choroid. See, here is blocking both the choroidal hyperfluorescence and the retinal hyperfluorescence, because the retinal vessel is not seen. But look at here, the choroidal fluorescence is blocked by the subretinal bleed. Another situation of hypofluorescence is an ischemia. So this is a branch retinal vein occlusion. You see CNV areas, the ischemia to this the foveal area, or the area drained by this vessel. So this is another hypofluorescence that is seen. See, regarding hyperfluorescence, we have to know that there is something called transmitted fluorescence, or the window defect. Here, actually, the retinal epithelium is gone. So this window created through the window, we are seeing the choroidal fluorescence. To know whether it's a transmitted fluorescence or window defect, actually we have to clinically see the patient and see that there is RP loss, and through the RP loss, we are seeing the choroidal fluorescence. To understand what is leakage, leakage means hyperfluorescence. As the angiogram proceeds, its margins becomes fuzzy. That is leakage. Look at this fluorescent angiographic picture here. There is a hyperfluorescence because of the NVD. As the angiogram proceeds, there is fuzziness of the borders of this hyperfluorescence. So it is a leakage. Then you see regarding pooling. See, this is pooling means collection of the fluorescein dye in the anatomical spaces created. So here you see there is an this is an angiogram of the smokestack appearance of a CSR. You see this dye getting pooled. I mean, the dye getting collected in the serous detachment, that space created. So that is called pooling. So again, this is again a patient with multiple leaks, where you also see serous detachment and then collection of the dye in the serous detachment. Staining means it is accumulation of the dye in the normal tissues like sclera or in the scar. Look at this scar. This scar is this is a scar in the fundus, and when you see this patient, you are seeing the scar there, and the hyperfluorescence is there, and this hyperfluorescence is not going beyond the margin of the scar. So that means it is a staining. Special situations. So you have to take consent for these patients with the fluorescent angiogram, and see this patient when this pregnant patient may give consent, and fluorescent does not cross the placenta, and typically and strictly you can do fluorescent angiogram, but I think many of us are not doing, for us at least, because many patients, the CSR come to us during pregnancy, but we generally delay the fluorescent angiogram. Renal failure patients, many of the nephrologists are now giving fitness for patients for fluorescent angiogram, even if there is renal failure, as this dye is not nephrotoxic, but generally we will, at least I will avoid doing fluorescent angiogram to patients with renal failure, advanced renal failure studies. Any allergy to fluorescein, you should not do fluorescein allergy. You will end up in trouble. It has happened to many people. And another important situation, any patient undergoing fluorescent angiogram, asthma. These patients who are asthma are very likely to undergo to go for anaphylactic shock. Patient with skin allergy, setopy, mind you, this can develop anaphylactic reaction. Another patient, this patient's impaired lymphatic circulation. Patient must have undergone mastectomy, coming with lymphedema of the hand. These patients again will have a high likely of getting anaphylactic reactions in lymphedema. So I will just quickly look at some of these clinical situations. I will just rush through because of the lack of time. See this a patient with diabetic retinopathy. This is a focal maculopathy, NPDR with focal maculopathy, microaneurysms leaking, fluorescent angiogram showing few microaneurysm which is leaking as the angiogram proceeds. Another patient with not much findings, but actually a few hemorrhages. When you do, there is dilated capillaries of the fovea giving diffuse leakage. So this is diffuse maculopathy. Of course, there is an NVE here. Another patient with this type of, another patient with PDR undergoing angiogram, you see the macula is devoid of circulation, so that is retinal circulation, so this is ischemic maculopathy. Another patient with this common situation, patient with succinate-like maculopathy, and when you do angiogram, there is microaneurysm, there is you look at this part, there is dilated capillaries which is leaking, so this is both the focal and diffuse maculopathy or a mixed maculopathy. Another situation where we generally can do fluorescent angiogram in diabetic retinopathy, we do is patient is some set of diabetic retinopathy, we are not able to grade because of the haziness of the media due to asteroid halosis. When you do angiogram, you see there is, to a big surprise, there is extensive NVE. And another situation, patient may have undergone PRP, pan-retinal photocoagulation, but patient is not, we are not able to visualize subtle NVEs. So these, because subtle NVEs after PRP will be very flat and subtle, and so when fluorescent angiogram will reveal these lesions. See this patient with the serous detachment. This is CSR, as anybody know. So this is a typical smokestack appearance of this patient. And see this patient has, again, CSR patient had got a smokestack and an ink blot leak also, which is a leak which is increasing here and pooling of the dye here. Another patient with CSR ink blot leak. Mind you, all these leaks may not be in the area of CSR, it may be outside the area of CSR. So another patient, bilateral patient presented like this, bilateral multiple point exudative detachment, arteriovenous phase of the angiogram dose, starry sky appearance, or a multiple pinpoint leaks, typical of VKH. Sometimes you may have confusion between multifocal CSR and VKH. Mind you, this is VKH, always the disc will be, almost always the disc will be hot. Another situation where the patient serous detachment is posterior scleritis. Of course, you have other findings, clinical findings like pain on eye movements, and ultrasound will reveal that is posterior scleritis and not CSR. Another situation where branch retinal vein occlusion, you can see this extensive ischemia. In CRVO, you see CRVO when you do, this is ischemic CRVO. When you do angiogram, you see the capillaries of the disc are leaking, and there is leak of the macular vessels. And see, there is a honeycomb-like edema. This is because this particular honeycomb-like edema is due to extensive cystic changes involving the entire macular area. Another patient, see, this is a classical CME. This patient intermediate uveitis and now present with reduced vision. When you do fluorescent angiogram, this is a classical floor petal appearance because the cystoid changes only involving the fovea. But when it goes to the periphery, you will see the findings like this, honeycomb-like of appearance. You see, this is a lamellar hole. The area of the lamellar hole is hypofluorescent, even though it's a cystic change. This is because the dye will definitely come into the macular hole area, but lamellar macular hole area, but the dye will immediately diffuse into the vitreous, so that area is appearing hypofluorescent. Fluorescent angiogram can also be used to differentiate between classic CNVM and occult CNVMs. See, this is a patient with a little bit of reduced vision, the few exudation, early phase angiogram showed a hyperfluorescent, as the hyperfluorescence increases and become fuzzy. This is a classic CNVM. Another patient presenting with a PED-like appearance. On PED, on an angiogram, you see the upper part of the PED showing pooling of the dye, lower part showing late stipple fluorescent. This late stipple fluorescent late phase angiogram is very typical of occult CNVMs. Another patient with occult CNVM. This particular patient, again, PED, when you do angiogram, you have few stipple hyperfluorescent, but the center of the this thing, you see a classic membrane is there, which is increasing in size. This size of the membrane is less than 50% the entire lesion, though this is a minimally classic CNVM. Same patient after 3 months, fluorescent angiogram, this classic part has now increased and is involving more than 50% of the entire lesion. This is a predominantly classic CNVM. So sometimes the patient is scarred CNVM. Patient will come to you with this type of activity. You don't know some hemorrhages. You want to know whether there is active or not. You want to re-inject this patient. You have to do fluorescent angiogram. You see this the scar getting stained, but the margins of the scar will become fuzzy later. That means there is this angiogram. These patients are having activity. Another case, the common, very once in a while you see a patient with this type of small hemorrhage there, retinal vessel dipping there. When you do a little bit of retinal edema, when you do fluorescent angiogram, you see retinal edema and even cystoid changes there. This is a stage 1 retinal angiomatous proliferation. So another patient with similar lesion, a PED there, retinal vessel dipping into that area of CNVM, a few hemorrhages there. When you do angiogram, the PED showing hyperfluorescence, and this area of CNVM, retinal vessel is dipping there. So this is again another finding of retinal angiomatous proliferation. This is So another patient, see a small hemorrhage. You can see a retinal vessel dipping there. When you did fluorescent angiogram, there is hyperfluorescence. There's a block fluorescent by the small hemorrhage there. Another hyperfluorescence there. But now you know that these are CNVM-like appearances. And vasculature. And the near infrared light used in the ICG angiograms are actually helping us to which can pass through this retinal pigment epithelium, lower lying blood, thin layer of blood, lipid, etc., and can make visualize the fluorescent choroidal vessels very well. And even the scattering of this light, infrared light, near infrared light is minimum even in the media opacities, and so we can visualize these. We can either use nowadays we are combining with FFA with ICG angiogram. We can either camera based or SLO based. It has got these phases, and you know, unlike FFA, we may have to really take very late phases of photographs. ICG has many uses. I am just limiting myself to common situations. It is a gold standard in the diagnosis of PCV. It's useful in the diagnosis of retinal angiomatous proliferation. It's useful in the diagnosis of recurrent choroidal neovascular membranes. And it's an adjunctive technique to fluorescent angiogram in AMD, especially in the presence of occult CNVM. This particular patient had presented to us with 1 week back with a similar orangish lesions at the fovea. We concluded that these are polyps. We did actually angiogram for this patient. We actually OCT showed this tall PEDs. You can see 2 PEDs here, little bit of blood here, and then we also found out there is a notch in the PED, and this is not transparent. So we have concluded this is actually we concluded that this is not this is PCV, and we did a combined FFA and ICG, and this combined FFA and ICG actually showed a branching vascular network ending in polyps. So we can see the PEDs are actually hyperfluorescent here at the edge of the PED. There are polyps, so this is very classical of this condition. So PCV can be diagnosed only with the ICG dye. So you can see another case of extensive bleed like this is PCV angiogram showing like this. You can see polyps in these lesions. So another case of ICG, ICG in PCV. See, this is again the same slide which I showed you. Same patient with a small hemorrhage, retinal vessel dipping this, angiogram showing neovascular membrane, surrounding edema producing bleeding, and so surrounding producing hyperfluorescent. Actually, ICG dye showed there is 2 hyperfluorescent spot which is not going away in the late phases. Unlike the lesions in the PCV, polyps in the PCV, these lesions does not get washed out in the late phases of the angiogram. I see another patient with the PCV, and this is a small pigment epithelial detachment. You see hotspot in the angiogram, and the choroidal ICG angiogram, and look at the FFA. You can see there is cystoid changes, maybe seen retinal angiomatous proliferation, serous detachment, and there is a connecting vessel which is bridging the retinal circulation with the choroid. So this is also there. Another classic membrane. See another classic case. You see retinal vessel communicating with the choroidal vessel. Retinochoroidal anastomosis, and a classic membrane is also seen. When you take OCT, you can see a membrane connecting the choroidal neovascular membrane with the retinal circulation. This is again retinal wrap lesions. Another indication, recurrent CNVMs. Most of the cases, recurrent CNVMs can be detected clinically and also by doing fluorescent angiogram. There are patients where fluorescent angiogram may not give evidence. In such cases, we can do ICG angiogram to know whether there are we can detect lesions recurrence of the CNVM. Another situation where it is used is in occult CNVM, we can actually characterize occult CNVM into vascularized PEDs, hotspots, and plaques by doing ICG angiogram. You know, fluorescent angiogram images well-defined membranes better than ICG, but ICG angiogram allows reclassification of fluorescent angiogram defined occult CNVMs into well-demarcated CNVMs. Many of the occult CNVM, when you do ICG angiogram, you may see the well-defined CNVM. This is my last slide. This particular patient has presented to us a few months back with a history of defective vision, bilateral lesion, little bit of serous detachments here. We thought it is VPH. When we did fluorescent angiogram, early hypo followed by little bit of hyperfluorescence, we thought probably resolving stage of VKH, or we were in confusion. When we do the ICG angiogram, we see multiple in areas of serous detachment. Both these fluorescent angiogram leaking areas and these hypofluorescent spots in ICG, both are actually serous detachments. When we do angiogram, when we see more numbers, see the number of lesions in the ICG angiogram is much more than what is seen in fluorescent angiogram. When we see such lesions and look at the lesions appears much larger in the ICG angiogram. When we see more lesions and lesions larger than the ICG angiogram, I mean fluorescent angiogram, they are very suggestive of PKH. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Sunil. I think we'll have the questions at the end of the session, and we'll move on to the next talk of the day. The other important investigation, especially in both anterior as well as posterior segment as well as clear and opaque media, is on ultrasonography. And more important than that is Oscar Wilde has once told, if I would have had a longer time, I would have written a shorter letter. I think the bottom line is understood. So I know it's very difficult to cover the entire ultrasound in 15 minutes, but I think Dr. Syed, who is currently heading the Department of Pituitary Surgery at Aravind Hospital, Tirunelveli, will definitely stick on to that time, and he's going to enlighten us on ultrasound in ophthalmic practice. Over to you, Syed.
So ultrasound is like an omnipresent diagnostic tool, which is help us to provide a non-invasive image. It is used in almost all the fields of medicine. And in ophthalmology, it has a unique role because it produces both a quantitative, it helps us in attaining a quantitative and qualitative assessment of almost all the parts of the eye. Basically, the instrument consists of 4 parts: a pulsar, a transducer, receiver, and display. In the transducer, we have a piezoelectric crystal which generate ultrasonic waves in a short pulses, which is then passed into the eye, and the reflected echoes are captured and they are displayed. Basically, the wavelength of the sound wave determines the depth of tissue penetration and also the resolution. We all know that the frequencies, the wavelength is inversely proportional to the frequency. So as the frequency increases, the depth of penetration decreases and the resolution increases. That's why in ocular ultrasound, we use a higher frequency wave, that is 10 megahertz frequency, so that we need a better resolution. Whereas in ultrasound used in obstetrics and abdominal ultrasound will have a lesser frequency, the depth of penetration will be more and the resolution will be a little bit less. And we all know that the velocity of sound rate depends on the density of the medium, and the sound travels faster in solids than liquids. This is very important because eye is composed of tissue of different density. And basically, when a sound wave passes from a medium of one density to other, there occurs a reflection of the sound waves, which is known as echo. This echo is analyzed in ultrasound. So the characteristic of echo depends on the acoustic impedance. That is, the greater the density of difference between the two medium, stronger will be the echo. Similarly, the other properties like angle of incidence, if the wave is like a perpendicular, then the echoes will be stronger. And the absorption of the waves by sound medium also determines the quality of the echo. So basically, we have 2 scans, A scan and B scan. In A scan, what we do is we pass a single longitudinal sound wave, which is reflected, and the reflected sound wave is analyzed and it's represented as a single dimensional display as a vertical spike. The stronger the echo, higher will be the spike. Whereas in B scan, multiple sound waves will be passed simultaneously at different angles. And the echoes, reflected echoes, are represented as dots, and they coalesce to form a 2-dimensional display that is known as B scan. And the strength of the echo is depicted as brightness of dot. More stronger the echo, brighter will be the dots. Standardized echography is a combination of both B scan and A scan. It gives more information than using a B scan alone. A scan probe is thinner, whereas the B scan probe is thicker and it contains a marker. Based on the marker, we have 3 prominent positions. Like if the probe is held, held parallel to the limbus, it is known as a transverse position. If the probe is held longitudinal to the limbus, it is known as a longitudinal position. And if the probe is held over the cornea, it is known as axial position. And So basically to screen a lesion, we used to do both A and B scan. Topographic examination is done by B scan to find out the location, extent and shape of the lesion, whereas quantitative examination is done by A scan, which to find out the internal reflectivity and sound attenuation, and kinetic examination is done with the help of B scan. Ultrasound is basically indicated in hazy ocular media whenever we are not able to see the media because of corneal opacification, myopic people or cataract. Ultrasound is useful. In clear media, it is used to assess basically the tumors and to find out intraocular foreign body or examination of retrobulbar soft tissue masses, and also is used in follow-up studies. Uh, in biometry, it plays an important role because precise measurement of axial length is very important to get a proper IOL power calculation. Besides, axial length measurement is also helpful in finding out a tumor and diagnosing conditions like nanophthalmos or PHPV. Coming to some abnormal lesions, vitreous hemorrhage will represent it as a fresh vitreous hemorrhage will appear like a fine dot echoes with low reflective echoes, whereas older vitreous hemorrhage appears as a denser dot echoes with increased reflectivity, and they occurs predominantly in the inferior aspect of the globe. Besides, the causes of vitreous hemorrhage like tear or foreign body or breakthrough vitreous hemorrhage can also be picked up by the ultrasound. To differentiate a vitreitis with a B scan is difficult, but some signs like presence of dot echoes throughout the vitreous or presence of thickening, RCS thickening will all help in pointing out the diagnosis, besides the clinical correlation like associated signs of inflammation, etc. Asteroid hyalosis appears as a bright round signals on B scan with a clear pre-retinal space. And because the hyalosis, asteroid hyalosis involve only the cortical aspect of the vitreous. PVD appears as a thin membranous echo which is concentrated to the globe, and it has a very low reflectivity. When it is layered with vitreous hemorrhage, sometimes the reflectivity can increase, but by reducing the gain, we can differentiate it from other differentials. Whereas retinal detachment appears as a thick, dense membrane with 100% attachment to the optic nerve head and moderate mobility. And the spike always remains even if you reduce the gain of the ultrasound. Whereas choroidals appears as a choroidals appears as a in chronic RD, the retinal thickness decreases and associated degenerative changes like cyst can be picked out in the RD. Retinoschisis appears as a smooth dome-shaped elevation, usually occurs in the infratemporal aspect of the globe and is characterized by a thin high spike. Whereas choroidals appears as a dome-shaped elevation, it also occurs in the periphery. It is characterized by a double-peaked A-scan spike with minimal mobility. If the choroidals is composed of serous choroidals, then the subchoroidal space will be clear, whereas in hemorrhagic choroidals, we will get a multiple dot occurs in the subchoroidal space. Ultrasound plays an important role in evaluating a traumatic globe. The globe integrity, in case of a scleral rupture, there will be presence of scleral folds or associated retinal detachment, vitreous hemorrhage, or vitreous incarceration. All can be easily picked up with the ultrasound. Intraocular foreign body appears as a bright hyperdense echo in the B scan. Intraocular foreign body appears as a bright hyperdense echoes in the B scan, and the echoes will persist even after reducing the gain, and is also characterized by presence of the post-acoustic shadowing. Whereas discolorated lens, crystalline lens appears as a biconvex shaped body, which can be mobile or fixed, whereas dislocated IOL appears like an intraocular, mimics like an intraocular foreign body with a high reflectivity and a shadowing effect and reverberations. And scleritis, there will be a thickening of the posterior sclera along with a clear space in the subtenon space because of the accumulation of fluid, which is known as T sign. Besides, ultrasound plays important role in evaluating tumors. Malignant melanoma appears like either a dome-shaped or mushroom-shaped lesion and with a characteristic low to medium internal reflectivity. And a spontaneous internal vascularity can be also picked up by A scan. Whereas choroidal hemangioma appears as a flat subretinal mass-like lesion with medium to high internal reflectivity. And there is no spontaneous internal vascularity. Choroidal which is a benign condition, is characterized by a very hyper-reflective echo with acoustic shadowing because it's composed of calcium crystals. In a pediatric age, retinoblastoma can be picked up by a solid mass, which appears as a solid mass in B scan with the presence of high A scan spikes, which correspond to the calcium deposition in the retinoblastoma. Though CT and MRI is investigative modality of choice in to evaluate orbital lesion, ultrasound also helps in a role. In orbital cellulitis, we can see a hyperdense orbital fat and with associated scleral thickening and T-cell. In orbital tumors like lymphoma or schwannoma can also be picked up by B-scan. Lymphoma mimics as a low reflectivity lesion with a low sound attenuation, whereas schwannoma can mimic present with a low to medium reflectivity lesion with moderate sound attenuation. Besides, extraocular muscles involvement in thyroid disease and myositis can also be picked up with the help of the ultrasound. In like a hazy media and mature cataract, one can very well pick up a cupping of the optic disc with ultrasound. Besides, in clear media, ultrasound helps us to differentiate papilledema, disc edema, and pseudoedema. Whereas in buried optic drusen, it appears like a very hyper-reflective lesion at the disc with a tall A-scan spike. Sometimes it can have acoustic shadowing also. In disease with involving the parenchyma and optic neuritis, there will be a diffuse distension of the optic nerve head, whereas in papilledema, one can have a nerve sheath distension with a clear space, which indicates there is fluid in the optic nerve sheath. Besides, structural abnormality like staphyloma and coloboma can also be picked up by ultrasound. In staphyloma, it has characterized by a smooth-edged excavation, and it is usually associated with a high myopia with axil length, increased axil length. Whereas in coloboma, we can have a sharp-edged excavation, and it's usually associated with a low axil length, that is microphthalmos. Sometimes it can be associated with RD also. Though conventional ultrasound can also be used to evaluate the anterior segment, UBM is a technology which gives the anterior segment in a better manner. It is used especially in glaucoma to evaluate the angle structures, and this topic will be covered in the next session also, tomorrow's session also. Besides, UBM plays an important role in diagnosing and plays a key role in diagnosing iris and ciliary body tumors. It is the only imaging tool that can precisely visualize this lesion, and it can also give the anterior extent of the lesion. So to conclude, ultrasound is a non-invasive and very portable and cost-effective device which can be performed in office setting, and it does not expose to radiation, and it provides a reliable and accurate assessment of glow. It's ideal for follow-up vision also. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Syed. That was a nice wrap-up on ultrasonography in both clear and CC media. Next, we move on to the OCT in macular diseases to be presented by our senior consultant from Arvind Hospital, Coimbatore, Dr. Saravanan. Over to you, Dr. Saravanan.
Sorry, is my screen visible now? Sorry.
That's fine now.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry for the delay. So, the advent of OCT has revolutionized the practice of ophthalmology, both retina as well as general ophthalmology and other specialties also. And this gives you a very nice view of the living retina without any cutting open the eye. You can just see the histological pictures of the posterior pole as well as periphery in the newer OCTs. So there are many ways of viewing the eye as well as the functions, and now OCT has become an integral part. And previously we had the time domain system, which was not that very advanced. The images were not that very clear. But right now we have the spectral domain, Fourier domain OCT, which is much more clearer than what we used to see in the earlier days. Compared to the HRT and GDX, you can see both the RNFL ONH morphology as well as the macula and the retina with the newer generation of HD OCT. So obviating the use of all these other older modalities. Main principle is it uses a Michelson's principle where light rays from the superluminescent diode is sent to the eye. The difference between time domain and spectral domain is that there's some fixed reference mirror in the newer systems, enabling us to give a much faster acquisition of images as well as higher resolution. Just to show the difference between the time domain and spectral domain, you can see the difference between these two. As well as I told you, it gives you a histological section of a living retina without cutting open the eye. And this is the picture given by the international nomenclature of OCT meeting. And one of the, we tend to see various layers, but one of the more important layers is the ellipsoid zone, or where the junction of the rods and cones, outer and inner segment of the rods and cones, so-called the ellipsoid zone, which is one of the things which is quite often seen to assess the anatomical damages in eye with the loss of function. So I thought we just go by a little bit of case by case series. So this is a case of a diabetic patient who came to us with a vision loss in the left eye. And you can, as you can see in the picture color, the black and white photograph, we have a succinate retinopathy. And FFA shows the leaking aneurysm in the center of that succinate retinopathy. And what the OCT shows is the presence of retinal edema. And we have an artificial color graph produced by the computer, which shows that the green is more or less normal. The blue and these things are thinner. That's the artifact which you see there. But the red, orange, and white, yellow, red, and white are all the areas where the retina is much more thicker. This is showing the picture of the aneurysms. And correspondingly, you can see the presence of cystoid cystoid edema as well as spongy-retinal edema. And following focal laser, you can see the response to treatment. You can see the disappearance both in the graph as well as in the OCT. So this is again one more diabetic case with the vision loss. And you can see the presence of extensive macular edema with almost 621.7 microns thickness. And we have a presence of large cysts as well as spongy edema. And you can see the white color, which sort of gives you a rough idea about the thickness. And this is following laser with the triamcinolone combo therapy. You can see the resolution. And you can compare the previous and the second picture to assess the both qualitatively. You can see the various changes, as well as quantitatively the response to treatment. So this is one more case with the patient who came to this CSME, diabetic macular edema. So this was the picture at the onset. We gave focal laser to this patient. And you can see that the vision had improved, and he came with a late onset. We can see the disappearance of the macular exudates at around 1.5 years of follow-up. But suddenly he came up with the vision drop, and we could not pick up any reason for the vision loss. But if you look at the OCT, you can see a newly developed vitreomacular traction, which is now the reason for the drop in vision. So this is very integral to assess the subtle vitreomacular interchange changes, because it's not possible to see these changes with the slit lamp, even with the contact lens, like a Goldman lens. It's not possible to visualize these subtle changes. And OCT is very, very integral to identify these VR interface changes. This is sort of a small collage of various manifestations of diabetic macular edema. The spongy edema, where you have only the thickening of the retinal layers. Presence of cysts, we call a cystoid edema. Sometimes we have both spongy and cystoid edema. In presence of subfoveal fluid indicate there's a more severe edema, acute onset of edema, which can be again a cause of drastic vision loss. And also you can pick up the vitreoretinal interface changes, where you have VMT with or without lamellar hole. And also sometimes you can pick up the presence of epiretinal membrane, which can be a cause for intractable diabetic macular edema. So this is a case where a patient had a severe respiratory infection, and he had a severe bout of cough. And he came to us with vision loss of after having a bout of cough. So what you see here is a large sub-ILM hemorrhage. So we don't know whether subretinal or sub-ILM. The appearance of the dumbbell shape as well as OCT is showing the presence of a large sub-ILM hemorrhage. So the location of the hemorrhage can be very clearly delineated with this OCT imaging. And when you did a YAG laser to drain the blood from the subilum space into the vitreous cavity, now the blood has drained. I can see the separated ilum, empty subilum cavity. So this also helps you to localize the presence where the blood is present, whether it's in this vitreous cavity, subhyaloid space, or the subilum space, or the subretinal space. So this one more case was trying to push start a car where he had a vision loss following trying to push start a car which had stopped on the road. And you can again see the dumbbell shape, the subilum hemorrhage. You can see the response to laser, and again you can see the presence of ILM, which is separated now. So even though in ulcer retinopathy, after draining the blood, the ILM does not usually fall back. It is usually stand separate. This is one more case who came to us with history of central scotoma like the previous case, but here you can see that the retina is elevated with a subretinal fluid indicating the common entity which you see quite often in young patients, in young males especially, that is central serous retinopathy. And in the other eye, you can see that there is a elevation of the RP, which indicates the presence of a retinal pigment epithelial detachment. There's a small serous RP detachment. So we can see where the level of fluid is in these cases. So again, this is one more case which was referred to us with the diagnosis of chorioretinitis. What you see is a small yellow lesion in the just above the fovea, and the FFA is showing a ink blot sort of leak there. But you can see the OCT. You have the presence of fibrin. You can see the retina is detached, and choroid is totally normal, obviating the diagnosis of chorioretinitis. And you can see the subtle hyperreflective changes in the subretinal fluid indicating the presence of subretinal fibrin. This case of acute CSR, where the fibrin is there, and you can see the retina is dragged there in that area where the subretinal fibrin is there. Sometimes the presence of these subretinal fibrin, and this is called the vacuole sign. Usually this indicates that the leaking point is somewhere very close to this vacuole sign. This is called the vacuole sign in central serous chorioretinopathy. So again, this is some examples of presence of subretinal fibrin in a case of CSR. So also it can come sometimes some of the cases where there's a small RP which corresponds to the either a small smokestack leak or an ink blot leak. The OCT will pick up a small break in the RP indicating a micro rip, which is where the leak is happening. And this is one more case again referred to as the chorioretinitis because the fluid was very, very shallow. But again, you can see in the OCT the choroid is totally normal. There is a small pocket of submacular fluid with the presence of hyperreflective echoes there, indicating actually subretinal fibrin with CSR rather than a chorioretinitis. Sometimes this will give you a correct diagnosis and you can proceed in the right direction as regards to treatment. So this is again a case, one of Dr. Shukla's case, where you can see that the leaking PED, where there's a PED and you can see the subretinal fibrin just overlaying the PED, indicating the presence of a leaking PED in a central serous retinopathy. Sometimes in chronic central serous retinopathy, you can have a large submacular foveal cyst, which may mimic a subretinal fluid. So it's not a case of acute CSR, but rather chronic CSR with the fluid within the retinal layers, and also you can see the RP tract signs in the color photograph. And this, some of the in contrast to the fresh CSR, you tend to see a lot of intraretinal cysts in patients with the chronic CSR, and the fluid tends to be quite thin compared to the fresh CSR, where the fluid is much more severe and much more higher than the chronic cases. So this is again showing the one of the common diagnoses which you see, that is the presence of macular hole, and also the other eye is showing the vitreomacular traction, which is a precursor to the development of the hole. So probably this eye may develop hole in the coming days. So you can see that the macular hole is a gap. You can measure the distance between the various diameters and also predict what will be the success rate after macular hole surgery. So this is somehow a series of wet AMD cases. This is an old lady who came to us with vision loss. You can see that there's a big RP elevation, and you can see that in the FFA there's a diffuse leakage indicating a occult cinium. So the neovascular complex is present below the RP. Unlike this case, where there's again one more old lady coming to us with vision loss. And here you can see there's the leakage is starting in the fluorescein in the very early phase, and you can see the neovascular complex is present above the RP. The red line indicates the RP, and the neovascular complex is present above the RP, indicating this is more of a classic CNVM. And this is the third type, where again Dr. Sunil was showing the presence of intraretinal hemorrhage. Whenever you see intraretinal hemorrhage in AMD setting, always suspect the presence of you can see the dipping vessel there, that is indicating a RAP lesion, retinal angiomatous proliferation. So you can, and this is the area which is the communicating vessel which is dipping into the retina. So OCT will show the communicating vessels, and the FFA will show the right angle vessel which is dipping into the choroid. And you will have an intraretinal hemorrhage compared to other cases where you see subretinal hemorrhage. So this is the typical case of RAP. Also, quantitatively, you can see the response to treatment with this is a case of wet AMD with the classic component showing the response to treatment with 3 injections of Lucentis. You can see the absence of leakage as well as the flattening of the OCT. So again, dry AMD, you can pick up the small RP changes here, elevations here. So depending upon the size of the drusen, small, large confluence of drusen can have the elevation irregularity of the RP, which is seen in different stages in different smaller or larger. So this is an old lady who had got 3 injections of Lucentis with no response, which was diagnosed as bilateral, wet AMD. There's no response, but you can see that it's a little bit different from whatever you saw earlier. The RP is totally sort of intact. You have some small subfoveal detachment with some sort of hyperreflective echoes coating the undersurface of the retina. This is a subtype of adult onset fovea macular vitiliform dystrophy where it's not a wet AMD, and usually there's no response to anti-VEGF injection. So this is the case you have to differentiate from the routine wet AMD, especially when you have no response to your injection. So again, this is one of the another type of wet AMD where you can see there's a large central serous retinopathy, and you have a small smokestack leak also with a diffuse RP epitheliopathy, initially diagnosed CSR. But you can see the PED is solid, triangular solid PED, and you can see the presence of the grape-like appearance in the cluster of grape appearance. It's actually this picked up in indocyanine green angiopathy. The case of polypoidal choroidal vasculopathy. What you can see here is the presence of a conical PED, which is solid compared to the CSI where it is empty. So one more subtype is this case of a doctor who came to us with history of chronic CSF for more than one year. He had got 2 sittings of focal laser. In the left eye, there was a small PED with a shallow fluid, and you can see the presence of fluid in the subfoveal space in the left eye, and a small shallow PED. Now look at the choroid. The choroid is quite thick with a pachyvessel, large vessels underlying the RP detachment, indicating this is a pachychoroid neovasculopathy. Look at these large choroidal vessels underlying that RP. So this is where the choroid is thick. So under the newer generation of Swepsos OCTs, as well as the enhanced depth imaging, also enhanced depth imaging capabilities, can measure the thickness of the choroid and diagnose this new entity, which is what we call as pachychoroid disease. And this is a pachychoroid neovasculopathy, which can lead on to a PCV also in later stages. And this when you have a patient of high myopia with a history of vision loss, always look at the OCT to diagnose the various stages of what we call as myopic traction maculopathy. The first picture is showing a thick posterior hyaloid, and here you can see the early traction on the fovea in the bottom picture. And you can see the presence of early schisis in these 2 pictures. And these are more advanced cases where you have a myopic macular schisis, the lamellar hole in the top picture, and a full thickness macular hole with a posterior pole detachment in the bottom picture. There are various stages of myopic traction maculopathy. And sometimes in wet AMD, you have this RP rip. Again, it's very critical to do OCT to diagnose. You can see the white arrows indicate the absence of RP, and the yellow arrows indicate the presence of double layer of RP, indicating the higher reflectivity. This is a case of RP rip. And also one of the common disease which are mistaken for DME, this is the presence of subtle whitening in the posterior pole, quite often misdiagnosed for a diabetic macular edema. You can see the retina has normal thickness with the absence of tissue within the layers, indicating that this is a mactal type 2, or what you call it as we used to call it as a parafoveal telangiectasia in olden days. So these can present with the neovascular membranes. You can see the hemorrhage there, and you can see the presence of thickening and the subretinal tissue there. So again, we'll go on to this case. This is a myopic subfoveal hemorrhage in high myopia. So sometimes you can pick up the presence of neovascularization, that's a myopic CNM with the presence of OCT. Sometimes FFA may not be able to visualize the such small vascular membranes. Again, the presence of ONH pit. Whenever you see a CSR and you have intraretinal fluid apart from subretinal fluid, always think of a ONH pit serous maculopathy. So this can diagnose the OCT as well. As regards to vein occlusion DME, you can assess the presence of thickness, height, and see the response to treatment. So in these cases, you can mainly, it's a useful tool to assess the response to treatment, to decide on stopping your treatment, as well as to decide on when to retreat. This will be the last case, one of where now we have a hydroxychloroquine, which is one of the common drugs which has been taken for rheumatoid arthritis and other associated disorders. And when you're taking for long term, you can have the loss of perifoveal photoreceptor. The fovea is almost normal. It's called the satellite sign, where the photoreceptors are almost normal in the fovea, but in the periphery, you have the absence of just parafoveal zones, not the periphery. Parafoveal zones, you have the absence of damage to the photoreceptor, indicating the sort of bullseye maculopathy, and this is what we call it as a satellite sign in OCT. So it's very critical to diagnosing hydroxychloroquine maculopathy. And I think we'll stop here because of lack of time. Thank you. If there are questions, we can take at the end. Thanks.
Over to you, Syed.
Thank you, Sir, for your wonderful presentation. And I request all the speakers to use cursor for pointing out the findings. And our Now our speaker is Dr. Karthik Kumar. He will be speaking, and he is a consultant in Narendra Hospital, Madurai, and he finished his MBBS from Bangalore Medical College, and he finished his MS Ophthalmology from Madurai Medical College. Over to you, Dr. Karthik.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Said. Thank you, everyone, for giving me the opportunity to present this topic. So the topic for today for me is multimodal imaging in retinal diseases. Ophthalmology is a specialized field of medicine where we can directly visualize the pathology and treat accordingly. Here, once we do a proper fundus examination, imaging becomes more important. Now, imaging is for documenting the disease process. It also helps to classify, treat, and follow up the cases very effectively. In fact, in the modern ophthalmic practice, it has become a standard of care. So each imaging modality has its unique advantages, and of course, they have their own limitations. So when they are analyzed together, they can increase the diagnostic sensitivity and specificity. So again, this term is new to us, but it is not new to other medical specialties like technology. We can define it as when we use more than one technological system to acquire images that complement one another for the purpose of diagnosis, prognostication, management, and monitoring of the disease, then we are in multimodal imaging platform. So if you use more than one imaging system, you can tell that you are doing a multimodal imaging. Of course, multimodal imaging includes FFA, ICG, which are dye-based, OCT, angio, and ultrasound. These topics have already been discussed. So we'll go to the other part where the other imaging modalities like color fundus photography, multicolor scanning laser imaging, autofluorescence, near-infrared reflectance, all these things. I'll be discussing this in this presentation. So yeah, these are things which we are going to discuss. Color fundus photography. As early as 1886, Jackman and Webster, they published the first fundus image in a gazette called Philadelphia Photographer. But the problem was there was a prominent corneal reflex. So what they saw was only a faintly visible optic disc, and they took a very long exposure. It was around 2.5 minute light exposure. Then things changed. In 1926, Carl Zeiss, they made the first commercially available fundus camera. Then in 1927, stereoscopic fundus photographs were made available. Then things emerged. The field of view became more. In 1960, 140-degree field of view camera came. And the major breakthrough was the availability of a digital fundus camera made by Dobbins and Steven Sasson. So all we do now is to see through the digital fundus camera. And the film-based fundus imaging is totally outdated. Even though the resolution was really good in film-based fundus imaging, there were a lot of other things which were quite difficult. It was difficult to manipulate the image, to process the image, and of course to transfer the image. Now we just click a button through internet and then it goes all over the world, but that was not possible previously. So all we do now is digital imaging, and the conventional fundus cameras, they measure around 30 to 45-degree field of view, and if you do a montage, you can go up to 90 degrees. So anything beyond 50 is called wide field photography, and more than 100 we call them as ultra wide field photography. So we use now this is the latest technology, which is the confocal scanning laser ophthalmoscopy, where point-by-point scanning of the retina is done using a focused laser beam, and the laser beam which is reflected is made to pass through a small confocal pinhole, and this reduces the scattered light, and hence the image becomes very sharp and high contrast image. And there are many types of cameras which use these are the bulky office-based traditional fundus cameras. Then came the miniature tabletop fundus cameras. We have the Optos, we have the Claris, we have the Indian-made Trinetra, and we have another handheld cameras which can shoot the fundus. And finally, we have the smartphone-based cameras also. And according to field of view, there are many cameras, there are many systems giving a different field of view. The classical fundus camera is around 50 degrees, maximum 90 with montage. And Optos and Claris giving more than 200-degree field of view, almost 80% of the retina can be covered. Why do we require a wide field imaging, because many retinal diseases like vasculitis, even diabetic retinopathy, RD, we can find pathology in the peripheral retina. So see, if this is the conventional fundus photograph, which where we can see around 30 to 45 degree field of view, this is the Optos imaging where we can see more than 200 degrees with a single shot of, with a single shot. So Optos has an ellipsoid mirror, more than 200 degree field of view. Almost 80% of retina is seen in one shot, and it uses red and green lights actually instead of white light. So the image which we get is a pseudo color image, and of course, no need to dilate the pupil. It is a non-mydriatic camera. Resolution is good. The acquisition speed is also very good. Just 0.25 seconds per scan. We can have color fundus photo. We have red-free choroidal, choroidal picture. We can have autofluorescence, FFA, ICG, you name it, we have it there. Even OCT is also latest addition. There are different models available. That is, what we have is Daytona. There are other models available also. So if this is a normal fundus photo, we can have a green, we can have red or the choroidal picture, we can have autofluorescence picture, we can have a beautiful fundus angiography till the periphery you can see, you can have a good ICG, you can also have a Swepsos OCT which is built into the Optos. So you can actually film any part of the retina and you can do a OCT. So that can be a major breakthrough. But there are also limitations. It is a pseudo color picture. It's not a true image. It's a pseudo color image. And more temporal fields are better seen than the superior and inferior fields because of the eyelids. We have to actually pull the eyelids apart properly to have a good film. Artifacts are also more common because of that. Then came the Claris, which gives a true color because it uses white light actually. And there's a hemorrhagic PED there, and actually. So what they use is they don't use a normal light. They use blue, green, and infrared wavelengths. So what happens is different wavelengths painted the retinal surfaces at different size, and we get a very detailed layer of the detailed retinal picture actually. What happens is in blue reflectance, the superficial part of the retina, the inner retina and the vitreal surface will become more prominent. So ERM can be beautifully seen with blue reflectance. And in green, we can actually see all the blood vessels and the lipid exudation can be seen. Drusen's and RP alterations, which are in the deeper retina, can be seen through the infrared reflectance layer. So it gives actually 4 pictures. So one will be the multicolor, next is the blue reflectance image, third will be the green reflectance, and fourth will be the infrared reflectance. So in one shot, you can get 4 pictures through spectralis. So where it is more applicable, in AMD, you can see Drusen's more prominently here. This is the multicolor fundus picture. This is the normal color fundus photo. You can see that Drusen's are seen very well with the multicolor picture. Then we can see sharply, or is it, the contrast is so good in multicolor picture that you can see the hemorrhages properly. You can see the exudation there. This is a AMD patient, wet AMD patient. In case of IPCV also, sometimes you can see the polyps. The green color things here are all the polyps. You do an ICG and find that after an ICG, you can see the polyps there. Again, in CNVM, you can see the contrast is so good that you can actually make out there is something under the retina. Even in IJT, you can see the crystals so clearly in both the eyes. That's the case of IgG type 2 IJT. And another important thing is in geographical atrophy, you can actually correlate the amount of atrophy in autofluorescence. Both are actually similar compared to the color fundus photo. So this is a new technique actually, so that everyone can experiment in spectralis. And here in diabetic retinopathy, unless you do a stereotactic photo, you cannot see the macular edema in one shot or one picture of what I say in color fundus. But in case of multicolor photo, we can see the cystoid pattern of macular edema. And again, beautifully, the neovascularizers are seen over the disc. So we can see better with multicolor fundus. There is a fibrovascular proliferation at the disc seen better with multicolor fundus. And again, the involved area in case of branched retinal vein occlusion is beautifully seen with multicolor fundus. The case of CSR, brilliant, is very well distinguished from here to here. You can see that black shade of the elevated retina because of the underlying fluid. And again, epiretinal membrane. This is a normal color photo, and this is the multicolor photo. We can see the epiretinal membrane. Just lying over the retina, you can see the extent completely in the multicolor fundus picture. So the advantages are you don't have to shift the patient to another camera to get a photo. So in a single device, you can finish off. Resolution is good. You can see all the details clearly. But again, it's in non-mydriatic mode. You don't have to direct the patient. Disadvantages, it takes slightly a longer time for the patient to get the image because of the good fixation requirements. Next comes the autofluorescence. In fundus autofluorescence, of course, this is the most underutilized, you can say, investigation in imaging. It is a simple, non-invasive image, but most of the times we don't give that much importance to this autofluorescence. But again, it gives a lot of details. It actually maps the lipofuscin distribution of the RP in the retina. And of course, other fluorophobes, if they present the disease pattern, like in case of breast disease, we find some other agents which are fluorophobes, that also can be mapped. So it also helps in understanding the disease pathology, how geographical atrophy progresses, how it happens. So those things can be understood. Also diagnostic in many things like Behçet disease or optic nerve drusen, you can actually diagnose with autofluorescence. Of course, in retinal dystrophies, you can also correlate the phenotype and genotypic variations. Autofluorescence, of course, it is from the RPE. We are actually measuring the lipofuscin from the RPE. So it is balanced between accumulation and the clearance. So when there is RPE dysfunction, there's going to be increased autofluorescence. When there is loss of photoreceptor, there's going to be decreased autofluorescence. So imaging devices, usually HRA is very good than the fundus camera. Optic nerve is black basically. Wherever there are no pigments, it's black. So optic nerve will be black, vessels will be black. Fovea is also slightly on the darker side because of accumulation of lutein there. So these are few conditions where we can expect. I'll show the pictures directly. So Behçet disease, you can see the hyperautofluorescent material in the macula. In RP, we can see we can see a hyperfluorescent circle around the macular region, and we can also see the dots. These are the bone spicules which you can see. In geographical atrophy, we can actually map the area of atrophied retina with autofluorescence. We can also show the extent of geographical atrophy and progression over a period of time if we take a serial autofluorescence pictures. In Stargardt disease, you can see a hyperfluorescence flecks all over the macula with the atrophic macula which appears black. And in CSR, you can see in this picture, this is an active CSR which is hyperautofluorescence. This is a chronic CSR with a track actually. Another CSR picture with beautiful tracking can be seen. So this is a beautiful test. We also have another thing called near infrared reflectance. Here we are going to get the signal from the melanin. So that is the difference between autofluorescence and this one, because we use a higher end of wavelength. We use a higher wavelength actually. So we get signals from the melanin, and this is particularly useful to detect reticular pseudotrusion. And one thing is, if you are using this one, the geographical atrophy will appear white in case of near infrared reflectance, whereas in autofluorescence it appears black. So in conclusion, the multimodal imaging means you are going to use more than one investigative modality. And imaging of the retina, this field is going to be a rapidly advancing field, and for one disease, you have multiple imaging options. So I think we should have a good knowledge of all the investigating modalities so that we can help the patient to get the relevant test and not burdening him with all the other investigations. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Karthik. So that is a very nice and showing the multicolor images as well as the wide field pictures and autofluorescence. Next on the list, we have Dr. George Manayath, who's going to talk on the newer addition to our investigative armamentarium, that is OCT angiography in diagnosis of various vascular disorders of the macula. On to you, George.
Yeah, thank you. Hope I'm audible at all centers. And let's look at OCT angiography in current retina practice. As we know that this is a new non-invasive imaging technique as an alternative to the dye-based fluorescein angiography. Here, in OCT angiography, which is taken with the same kind of technology as OCT machine, takes multiple cross-sectional images of the retinal layers, and the capillary level blood flow in the retina and choroid is seen by the motion of the blood cells in the capillaries against a contrast of the background. So only the blood vessels and the motion of the blood cells are seen against the background contrast of the retina. So the fluorescein angiography has the advantage that it gives a wider field of view and dynamic visualization of the blood flow. But it has the disadvantage that we know for many years, that the anaphylaxis and risk, and it's an interventional procedure. So when we have a non-invasive quick modality like OCT angiography, which can be repeated at each patient visits and can be used for the follow-up of the patient and follow-up of the lesion. Mainly it is used for the macular diseases. Though now the wide field OCT angiography is available. So let us look at some of the clinical experiences. So let us start with one of the common diseases, central serous chorioretinopathy. The findings on OCT angiography, one is dark areas like this, which are ill-defined low flow areas, which corresponds usually to the overlying area of subretinal fluid on OCT B scan. And another finding is a dark spot like this, which is no flow area, and usually it corresponds to PED on the OCT B scan. So importance of these low flow and no flow areas is that the current pathomechanism that is postulated is there is inner choroidal or choriocapillary ischemia. That is the significance of this low flow, no flow areas, and usually it overlies the pachyvessels in this pachychoroid kind of settings, and these are zones of choriocapillary reduced flow. Another important finding that is seen on OCT angiography are abnormal choroidal vessels. You can see this, either it is a ball of wool kind of pattern or an indistinct tangled pattern. So this ball of wool pattern signifies the presence of a CNVM in the setting of chronic CSR, whereas indistinct tangled pattern can be there even without the presence of a CNVM in chronic CSR. So why you need OCT angiography in a chronic CSR is because a type 1 neovascularization or a pachyneovasculopathy in this pachychoroid kind of setting, it is difficult to diagnose because the overlap of the clinical picture and imaging features of chronic CSR. Because fluorescein angiography will show just a diffuse RP leak, or ICG might show in both the cases multifocal areas of choroidal hyperpermeability, and CNVM is usually missed. Let us look at a case example here. This patient was referred for PDT with a diagnosis of chronic CSR with subfoveal diffuse leak, as you can see here. But when we did OCT, the right eye showed a typical pachychoroid. The left eye showed a shallow subretinal fluid and a flat irregular PED. This flat irregular PED overlies a pachyvessel, and in the setting, the diagnosis at this stage was a chronic CSR. When you did a OCT angiography, this is superficial capillary plexus. It was normal. Deep capillary plexus also normal. And avascular layer segmentation shows a very clear-cut neovascular network, which is overlying this area of flat irregular PED in the setting of a chronic CSR. So the diagnosis changes to pachychoroid neovasculopathy, and OCT angiography is very useful in picking up this subtle neovascularization in the setting of pachychoroid or chronic CSR. So the treatment changes from PDT to intravitreal anti-VEGF injection with this diagnosis. So another important diagnosis or very common diagnosis is age-related macular degeneration or wet AMD. So here a patient 50-year-old patient with defective vision in the right eye 6 months. There is a subfoveal PED with sub-RP hyperreflectivity suggesting a fibrovascular PED, and the fluorescein angiography or the ICG angiography reveals the sub-RP neovascular network. But you also see that this OCT angiography also picks up this sub-RP neovascularization almost as comparable as the fluorescein. This is the fluorescein, this is OCT angiography, both are almost comparable. So this is a type 1 or occult CNVM on OCT angiography. Another example here is a 54-year-old male patient, 1 month defective vision. He has a large subfoveal irregular PED with sub-RP hyperreflectivity and a pre-RP hyperreflectivity. So the fluorescein angiography shows a small classic CNVM, but the ICG angiography reveals a much larger neovascular network. And this do not correlate. This small classic CNVM do not correlate with this large neovascular network on ICG angiography. OCT angiography in one of the superficial segmentations at the avascular layer shows this beautiful neovascular network, whereas a deeper segmentation shows a much larger neovascular network. This OCTA superficial segmentation corresponds well to the small classic component, whereas deeper segmentation, as you can see here, the OCT angiography through a deeper segmentation do not correlate with the small classic CNVM, but it correlates with the sub-RP neovascular network seen on ICG angiography. So almost comparable to ICG angiography. So this is a minimally classic CNVM with a small classic and a large sub-RP component of occult CNVM. So here we have already mentioned by Dr. Saravanan, and that's a patient presenting with small subretinal, small intraretinal hemorrhage and retinal edema at the macula. There is a CNVM with overlying intraretinal edema, and it is important to note this intraretinal nodule with hyperreflective nodule, and the fluorescein angiography here shows early frames show a vascular looping at the fovea, which is progressively leaking in the late phases, and the ICG angiography do not show polypoidal lesions. So in the vascular segmentation of OCT angiography reveals this large neovascular network. This is a neovascular network in the outer retina, and when we look at this filling from the superficial layers deeper as it goes, the subretinal component becomes large, giving the diagnosis of a RAP lesion, reverse neovascularization, intraretinal component enlarging towards the sub-RP and subretinal component. So here the RAP lesion is seen. After the injection, as you can see, the size of the CNVM is reduced in size, as well as the capillary density on OCT angiography. After 3 months, when there is a recurrence, the size increases again, with the capillary density also increases. Another new entity, that is subclinical CNVM, after the OCT angiography, now the left eye of this patient here shows an occult CNVM with subretinal fluid. The right eye of this patient just has drusenoid PEDs, as you can see here. But the OCT angiography picks up a small choroidal neovascular membrane, which after 6 months and 1 year, as you can see here, is growing in size. After 1 year, patient becomes symptomatic with subretinal fluid, and then only the treatment is given. So this is a subclinical CNVM. For example, this is a case example where the patient has a right eye scarred CNVM. The other eye just shows drusenoid PEDs like this. This is a drusenoid PED. Patient is asymptomatic. But when we do an OCT angiography for this patient, it picks up a neovascularization, as you can see here, neovascularization. And this neovascularization corresponds to this drusenoid PED on the en-face imaging. So this is a clinically quiescent neovascularization. Patient needn't be treated, but require a frequent follow-up and home Amsler's monitoring. At any time patient becomes symptomatic, can be treated to preserve the 6/6 vision with fewer injections at that stage. So coming to the most common diagnostic entity that we see in retina practice, that is diabetic retinopathy. We usually to rule out macular ischemia or new vessels in this setting of diabetic retinopathy. So here you see the fluorescein angiography. It shows a macular ischemia with enlarged and irregular foveal avascular zone. But when you compare the same macula to the OCT angiography, you can see the enlarged and capillary dropout showing this macular ischemia almost comparable to the fluorescein angiography. The macular ischemia is easily picked up and sometimes better picked up with OCT angiography. And microaneurysms, however, is better seen with fluorescein angiography, not very well picked up on OCT angiography. So let's see a clinical example here. This is a mild NPDR patient here, bilateral. OCT do not show much macular edema. Vision is 6/9 in both the eyes. So when we do an OCT angiography without any dye injection or anything, so you see that the irregular enlarged foveal avascular zone in superficial capillary plexus. You see the deep capillary plexus also shows an enlarged irregular FAZ. So macular ischemia is what is causing the one-line drop in this patient. Another diabetic patient here. The left eye had a CRAO 3 months back and disc pallor. The right eye shows severe non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy, and the OCT angiography involving the disc shows an early neovascularization on the temporal part of the optic disc. So this is not a severe NPDR, this is a early PDR is diagnosed with the OCT angiography. Here also this fluorescein angiogram in a case of pre-retinal hemorrhage picks up this neovascularization with fluorescein angiography. But when you do the OCT angiography, almost comparable pickup of neovascularization elsewhere compared to the fluorescein angiography. So here again a patient who has other eye vitreous hemorrhage and left eye showing almost like a moderate NPDR kind of picture here. But when we do OCT angiography, lot of CNP areas nasally, and one of the segmentation of OCT angiography which passes through the vitreoretinal interface here picks up this neovascularization. So this is a NVD, a slightly raised NVD from the disc. So that it's a PDR case, and the montage OCT angiography reveals these many areas of non-perfusion, and it's a PDR diagnosed with OCT angiography, and peripheral targeted for PRP laser is given to the areas of ischemia. So again, a patient with severe non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy, and there is a clinical suspicion of NVE here. And this, when OCT angiography, it shows the ischemia corresponding to that area of suspected NVE, but it doesn't show a clear-cut NVE on OCT angio. And OCT co-registered D-scan shows that it's an intraretinal microvascular anomaly rather than a neovascularization per se. So now with the advent of 16 by 16 millimeter wide field plexelite kind of images, most of the important areas concerning diabetic retinopathy can be got in a single shot with this OCT machine, and many a times we can avoid the fluorescein dye, at least to rule out these kind of lesions. Another lesion is central retinal artery occlusion. So here the patient has sudden loss of vision. The fluorescein angiography reveals a macular ischemia in this case, and the corresponding OCT angiography also confirms the same finding, that the vessels are perfused only around the optic disc and the macula is showing non-perfusion. So this is a central retinal artery occlusion. Here we have a 50-year-old patient who has a sudden onset of inferior field defect, and the superior macula on OCT shows this hyper-reflective inner layers, suggesting a branch retinal artery occlusion. And this is a BRAO compared to a normal OCT, which is showing a normal. Here there is a hyper-reflective inner layer suggesting BRAO. The OCT angiography correspondingly shows ischemia in the superior macular area, in the superficial plexus, deep plexus segmentation, and even in the avascular retina. So full thickness of, it's an ischemic type of CRAO. And coming to the next entity, that is a vascular occlusion, branch retinal vein occlusion. Here the fluorescein angiography shows this macular branch vein occlusion late linkage. But when we compare the OCT angiography of this patient, it shows the capillary dropout and the enlarged FAZ, suggesting a macular ischemia in this macular BRVO. The routine BRVOs also, you can see the ischemia CNP areas almost comparable to the fluorescein angiography here. And when you have a montage of OCT angiography, the entire ischemic areas can be detected to do a laser photocoagulation to the ischemic area. Also in non-ischemic CRVOs also, you can have macular non-perfusion or macular ischemia, that is well picked up with this capillary dropout on OCT angiography images. So now this technique is only evolving and it has not reached as advanced as a SD-OCT now. So we have some of the drawbacks for this entity. Here you have when a patient blinks or patient move the eye, you can have this movement artifact or sometimes projection artifact of these superficial vessels projecting onto the deeper segmentations. And also sometimes very common is a segmentation error where the machine rendered sections or do not pass through correctly through the area of concern or area of pathology. For example, this patient has a CNVM with intraretinal fluid and subretinal fluid, but the machine rendered automated segmentation that is seen here, you can see the 5 segmentation here, 6 segmentations, none of them show a CNVM. But when doctor does a detailed manual segmentation, you picked up this neovascularization, which would have missed actually. So this is the segmentation error because of the automated segmentation software. So now some of the advancement I already mentioned that the newer machines like the Zeiss Plexelite kind of machine initially gave 12 by 12 millimeter scans. Now we have the 16 by 16 millimeter with a single gaze, single capture with the OCT machine. Almost all the important areas, as you see in this patient, with the neovascularization like in diabetic retinopathy can be picked up with a single click actually. And the future, maybe we can expect this kind of an Optos kind of OCT angiography image, which could which we can do away with the dye-based angiography in most of the cases. So to summarize, the OCT angiography, which is an evolving technique, currently helps in diagnosing type 1, type 2, type 3 CNVMs in wet AMD. PCV, the polyps being low flow lesions may not be picked up well, but the branching vascular network is picked up. But as of now, we don't have an purely OCT based retreatment criteria for CNVM. We depend on a combination of OCT and OCT angiography, but fluorescein angiography may not be required in all cases of CNVM in wet AMD kind of setting to treat. So in chronic CSCR, we have seen that it is important to rule out these neovascularizations or pachyneovasculopathy, vascular diseases like diabetic retinopathy or vein or artery occlusion. It is important and easy to pick up the macular ischemia as well as neovascularization. And as of now, we need better resolution machines with better segmentation software and with a wider field of capability. So thank you for patient listening, and I acknowledge the help from Dr. Saravanan for this presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, George. That was a very extensive and a lot of nice case to demonstrate the findings which you want to show. Thanks, George. So next on the agenda, we have Dr. Naresh, who is the head of the Department of Retina in Madurai, Arvind. So he's going to talk on the next topic. Over to you, Naresh.
Dr. Saravanan. Just to start on a lighter note, actually, I remember the words of our former Chief Minister, C.N. Annadurai. He used to say that a politician, while sleeping, should always move his leg and sleep, otherwise people will think that he is dead and he'll be buried. So like that, I think academicians should conduct webinars to remind the people that we are still academicians. So again, for giving me such a wonderful opportunity, I'd like to thank the organizing team of Tirunelveli Eye Hospital. And from the imaging, we'll go on to the visualization system actually. So visualization is one of the nicest area where we have seen a lot of developments in the sense evolution over a period of time. So initially when we are doing VR surgeries, initially like our mentor Dr. P.N. sir, they used to do the vitrectomy with indirect ophthalmoscopy, holding the lens in the left hand, indirect on over their scalp or the head, and with the cutter in the right hand. So it was such a difficult thing because the image is totally inverted and laterally reversed everything. But in spite of that, they have done a wonderful job almost 40 years ago. Then came a lot of contact system. Then we had the non-contact system in which Biome was a big, landmark development. Now from that, we are moving to the next system, but it's not going to replace that. But basic thing is we are going to operate by not seeing through the microscope. So this is how we see a surgeon operating. So the surgeon is seeing through the eyepiece and operating with the biome on. But in case of a digitally assisted vitrectomy system, so there are so many systems currently in the market. The first one to come commercially and which is being successfully done is the Alcon's NGT system. We have no financial interest in that. We have got other systems. So the one is from Apasami from Chennai. The one from Zeiss is also Artview is available now. Currently, it is both for the anterior as well as surgeries, and the one from Leica has been withdrawn currently because it's not meeting the standards. Maybe they might reintroduce later. So this 3D visualization system has brought in a new dimension to the entire VR surgery. So what is happening here is the eyepiece of the microscope is replaced by a high definition HDR camera. So this is the hallmark of this system. The rest of things are going the same. So this camera is going to capture whatever is seen through this, the regular biome at the Recite system, and the image is falling on a 55-inch three-dimensional television, which is almost kept roughly around 90 to 120 centimeters away from the surgeon. So closer is also bad, and farther away is also bad. So ideally, it should be between 90 and 120 centimeters from the surgeon. So the basic two things are the camera is attached to the eyepiece of the microscope and the 55-inch three-dimensional high-resolution, high-definition television, which is through which the image is forming, and we are seeing the image formed on the TV, and we are going to operate. So this is the entire system, and you have got, of course, a high-definition computer, which basically does the signal processing of the image, which is created by the camera. Another important thing is the polarized glasses. So everybody in the operating room, right from the surgeon to the sub nurse to every assistant, they will have to wear this. Unless otherwise you wear this, you will have a blurred image, and this polarized glasses is going to give you the 3D image which is falling on the camera, which can be seen conveniently. In fact, the machine comes with a big, a large number of camera, the polarized glasses, so that it is sufficient enough for all the people to wear that. So when you take into consideration the display of the cathode ray tube television, which we are using when we were children, has got a resolution of 640 by 480. But what we are currently using is a 4K. But if in case in future, if you are going to get a 8K, the problem is you'll have to keep much closer, but it will be difficult for us. And most important thing is, because we are using HDR, we have got a very enhanced depth of field, so that whatever is there in the vitreous or within the layers of the retina can also be the three-dimensional viewing of the fundus while operating is beautifully seen. Another important thing is the high magnification. So if you want to magnify in an image, especially in a computer, will have the pixelation. But in this case, when you magnify the image, there is absolutely no pixelation. The image clarity is maintained very clearly. So when you see this, when we enlarge the picture, there is when you're zooming in to the structures of the retina, when you're operating, there is no pixelation. The clarity is still maintained. And another thing is the magnification. So this sort of magnification is not possible when we are operating with the operating microscope. You can see the macular hole, and you can see much closer to the macular hole. So in fact, the whole screen is almost 55-inch screen is filled with the macular hole. So the resolution is absolutely stunning in this when we are operating. And there are digital color channels. We have got red-free, the blue and the yellow channels, because these are all virtual filters. Basically, they help without using the dye or the the triangular state. You can visualize the vitreous better, and the complete clearance of vitreous is possible without using any dye or any transfer, just by using the virtual filters. And these are all can be operated by the surgeon himself using the filter. So this is what we do while operating. You can change the color of the filter, and you can visualize the which is better. The most important feature which I personally feel is that the illumination which we are using. If you see, this is the illumination which we are using for the surgical system. When you are operating, Usually we sometimes go up to 100% of the illumination when we are visualizing through the microscope. But in this, normally we use 30%, but in this, you can have a wonderful view of the fundus with just 10%. So the advantage is you operate for a longer time in a complicated case. When the illumination is at just 10%, the chances of phototoxicity is much reduced actually. So unless, it's one of the biggest advantages of the system. Just with the 10% of the illumination, the entire fundus viewing is so perfect. This is one of the videos where you are using just the 10%, 5% of illumination with ICG, and you're going for a surgery with a beautiful visualization. Okay. So this is another important thing. The most important thing is most of this, in fact, this Ingenuity is a slave, and the master for the Ingenuity is your Alcon Accurus, or your what do you call it, vitrectomy machine. All the controls are made with the vitrectomy machine. Another thing is even the surgeon can do the manipulation with his foot pedal. So both the legs are always busy. And one more thing is, if you want to take the images, if you want to record anything, it can be done by the surgeon. You can pass the recording, and whenever you want, you can record. And this machine has got almost 4 TB storage, so that you can store up to 4 TB. And another biggest advantage is this machine or this system is both your editing table also. Whatever video you have recorded, you can then and there edit with the software available inside the machine, and voiceover can be done, and it can be made into PowerPoint. So you don't need to take the video to any professional editors to edit. So you can just by the touch of your finger with the software, it can be edited. The biggest advantage is on the physical impact. So most of the VR surgeons over a period of time will be developing some sort of back pain, especially when you are doing a high volume surgery. But in this system, you are sitting, supporting your back, visualizing with your neck straight. So the chances of your back getting hurt is much lesser. And another advantage is the surgical collaboration. When you see this, the surgery becomes more accountable. Whatever the surgeon sees, it is seen by every single person who is there inside the operating room. So you are more accountable. So all the mistakes which we are doing while doing the surgery is seen by everybody. So we'll have to be very careful while doing. And another important thing is, it is a wonderful teaching tool, because the people will be seeing what we are operating. So it is easy for us to teach or learn from this system. And there are few videos before we case, I think is a case with the submacular hemorrhage. So where we have done a complete vitrectomy, you can see. So the vitreous is completely removed, and you can see a massive subretinal hemorrhage. So what we see, basically we do is we go for a peripheral 180-degree diathermy, and then we do a retinectomy peripherally for 180-degree, just fold the retina. And before folding the retina, you inject the balanced salt solution under the retina using a 44-gauge needle. The it will be formed when the retina is detached. Once the retina is detached, do a fluid air exchange, and then you just fold the retina over the nasal side. You can see the massive subretinal bleed. So this can be removed along with the membrane. In case if the macula, the RP over the macula is very badly affected, we can go for RP transplant also. The biggest problem with this sort of case is the membrane which we remove from under the retina is very chewy and very difficult to remove. Sometimes you have to go for a 20 gauge also. Once the membrane is removed, you just inject the PHCl, reposition the retina, and then it should be treated like a giant retinal tear, and we'll have to do the laser and replace with the silicone oil. So this is a case where we do a PVD induction. So this is a pediatric retinal detachment. Usually the PVD induction is very difficult to induce in these cases. So what we usually do is after a decent vitrectomy, fill the eyeball with PFCl and stain the vitreous with the triamcinolone. And using a Tanos diamond dusted scraper, you keep scraping the vitreous. Once they form like thin membrane. The vitreous is then removed with the help of a forceps. And when you are removing the or lifting the vitreous, the PFCL sits under the PFCL and gives a nice detachment. So when you do a complete PVD induction in case of a pediatric retina, it's a very reassuring sign that we are very, to some extent, we are very sure there will not be any redetachment in these cases. And this is actually named as what we call a Megavis ring by one of our colleague, Dr. Jayant Kumar, and this was published by us recently in the Indian Journal of Ophthalmology also. So this is another case of giant retinal tear. So the reason I am showing these cases is there is no limit for this machine. See, whatever we are doing with the regular vitrectomy viewing system, we can do all these surgeries. There is no, limitation for this machine. In fact, there is no learning curve also. So this is a giant retinal tear where you can see the entire temporal retina is folded over the disc and the nasal side. And there are some PVR changes. So what we do is after the complete vitrectomy, after ensuring that the entire vitreous has been removed, you just inject the PFCL and reposition the retina to its actual place and fill it with PFCL. A complete base resection is done, and then we go for a what we call endo laser, usually 10 to 15 rows, and replace it with silicone oil. So this is another case. The reason for showing this case is this is a phaco combined with vitrectomy. I think this is macular hole with vitrectomy. So what we are doing is the retroillumination. The phaco is done with the same Ingenuity system. So initially they were saying there is a time lag of 90 to 80 to 90 milliseconds, but this has been eliminated. So doing a phaco is not difficult, especially when you're using a combined cassette in your vitrectomy system. You can do a complete vitrectomy surgery in your system. You don't need to depend on any anti-segment surgeon, or you don't need to keep shifting the patient from one theater to another. So once the vitrectomy is done, this is a case of macular hole. So we use PVD, and after staining the ILM with brilliant blue, the ILM is peeled. And as I was telling, like when you're peeling, you can increase the maximum, magnification to the maximum. So initially we'll feel and peel actually. With the Ingenuity system, you can see what you're peeling. So such is the magnification. And this is another case of orbit maculopathy. So there are various techniques. So in this, what we basically do is taking a small flap of sclera after the vitrectomy. One of the 25 gauge port is replaced with 23 gauge because we cannot negotiate the, you can see it is replaced with 23 gauge because we cannot negotiate the scleral plug through 25 gauge. It's sometimes difficult. After complete vitrectomy and ILM peeling and fluid air exchange is done, you can see the optic disc pit is plugged with the patient's sclera. So this gives a wonderful result in these cases. And I think this is a macular TRD. So in diabetics, it's so wonderful actually because as I was telling, 5% illumination is enough. When you're doing a bimanual surgery, if you're giving more than 10% or 20% of illumination of your chandelier, the visualization is much better and feeling is made very comfortable. So this case it's a mono, uni dressing. So where we are removing the membrane and the rest of the membrane is removed with the cutter. I think this we have seen. So we'll go. This also is good. So this first we have seen all the macular. And finally, one of the last videos will be of impact of foreign body removal. So this open globe injury with corneal tear with traumatic cataract. So we can do both together. So in this, we basically were doing a lensectomy, and you can see a foreign body in the infratemporal quadrant after the PVD induction. And usually the foreign body is just attached to the retina sometimes. So you can use the MBR blade to tease the foreign body away from the retina without injuring the retina. So we are using an MBR blade to tease the foreign body away from the retina without injuring it. Usually we use an intraocular rare earth magnet. So it's a 19 gauge. So it picks the magnet well and just align it. And we use a electromagnet to bring the foreign body out. So the reason for saying is, so this particular Ingenuity system has got the advantage of using every, is useful for doing every other surgery. So we have done 2 studies in this, basically about the performance of this DAVS system. So this was the conclusion actually. So when we compare the surgical performance of ILM peeling using this system with conventional, we found that the only disadvantages, because this was done during the initial phase of our surgeries, the only difference we found compared to the 3D, I mean the conventional microscope, was picking the ILM was, the attempts taken to pick the ILM was slightly significantly more in case of Infinity initially. But otherwise, it is the same actually. So there is no disadvantage of using this system. And in fact, when we had a, what do you call, this thing, utility of this, everybody felt that the system is perfect. Right from the fellows to the senior consultants. So there is the only disadvantage they found was this white balance going in between and the pseudo color, which is sometimes so basically, coming to the advantages, it improves the surgeon's posture and reduces the fatigue. The magnification is wonderful. As I was telling, the entire 55-inch can be filled with the image which you're operating. And we can operate with just 5 to 10% of the light source. And as I was telling, the magnification is so huge in this. And we are going to see the image on a 55-inch screen. So it extends the surgical life of VR surgeon. Even if the VR surgeon has got a visual acuity of 624 because of his cataract, still he can operate surgeries provided his hands are still stable. And there is absolutely no learning curve in this. And it's a wonderful teaching tool, because when you're teaching in an analog, you'll be sitting next to the fellows and will be commanding, giving the commands or the suggestions, which is disturbing for the patient. But in this case, you can put a what you call Bluetooth the headset to the surgeon who is operating. You can stay some few feet away or few meters away. You can watch and you can give the suggestions to the surgeon, so that the patient who is under local anesthesia not listening to that and will not be disturbed. And that way, it's a wonderful teaching tool. In fact, we have got another paper in review where we have compared the fellows and the PGs watching the surgery in this system versus what you call the conventional system. And this definitely is a better teaching tool, as felt by most of our learners actually. So, but there are few disadvantages. Probably the first disadvantage will be the accountability, because whatever mistake we are doing while operating is going to be seen by everybody. So we have to be more accountable. And the cost of the machine is slightly prohibitive right now. Maybe in future it might come down. And one of the advantages is if the media is easy, it's a bit difficult. And last one is the white balance, which needs to be corrected often. Sometimes it goes off in between the surgery, but this has been now eliminated because there is now auto white balance. But in spite of that, sometimes in between surgery it goes off. That's the only time where you'll have to replace your headset. Otherwise, it's a wonderful system where you can do every other VR surgery with the system. So again, once again, I thank the organizers, Meenakshi Madam and others for giving me this wonderful opportunity. Thank you very much. Syed, you're not audible, Syed.
Audible, sir?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Yeah. Thank you for your wonderful presentation. And on behalf of Aravinda Hospital, Tirunelveli, I thank every speakers for their effort. And right now we have Dr. Kim sir with us. And all speakers have sticked on their time. And I ask Kim sir to put a word.
Thank you, Syed, and I want to thank all the speakers for the wonderful presentation. I think we are in a different era today with all these newer imaging modalities, and a very, very exciting period from the time when just fundus photography was taken to where we are now. We have seen those days when we were using film-based cameras, and today we'll ask what is a film. So any of the newer person, and the way we can modify these images and play with these images has made a tremendous change in how we treat the patients, especially what George was presenting on OCT angiography has revolutionized how we see retina especially with the non-invasive technology and the way like the new equipment like the Plexi-Elite and all is changing. The way we see images is simply remarkable, and and all goes in the benefit of the patients. Understanding the pathology at a very, very early phase has made a huge difference in some of those cases where we hardly had any information, like one of those cases where he said on CSR, where the pachychoroid was seen, and then the other eye you find different lesions. These were not happening before. And today that's happening. So all the more reason it is very important to understand the basics of these imaging modalities. And all the speakers today, I think, have put up a very good presentation on why these each of these modalities. Still, fluorescein angiography holds its importance in quite a few places. So is ICG. And of course, ultrasound is still a major player in our, I'm sure all of us understand how an ultrasound or the B scan is so important in our day-to-day management of patients. And the multimodal imaging has actually changed how you combine the different modalities of imagining and imaging, and then getting information out of that is also changing how you approach to each patient. But what is important is today, earlier we were just imaging was just one small tool that we were using. But today you need to spend a lot more time on each patient, especially what Saravanan and George were presenting on OCT and OCTA. Unless you look for those subtle changes in those images or over a period of time, you're likely to miss those early lesions in those cases. And finally, Dr. Naresh gave a beautiful presentation again. Today, all our cases are being done on this DAVS system. More importantly, because it gives a good stereopsis, but also the teaching tool, especially for all the fellows who are out there, those teaching becomes a very, very, very important tool at this point of time. And as he points out, in our today crisis of Corona, people are saying that this would be the best way to operate on patients rather than looking at through these fundus. Through these the conventional microscopes. You could be doing away with that and using this DAVS system for operating makes a huge difference in handling these patients in this time. So I want to thank all of you for sharing this important points on different parts of ophthalmic imaging. But I'll let Saravanan to continue on the questions or any queries that may be coming up. Thank you again, Syed and Dr. Meenakshi, for this opportunity.
Thank you, sir.
Syed, you want to take any the questions? I think it's coming on. One of the questions on YouTube was how can you please demonstrate the satellite sign for diagnosing hydroxychloroquine toxicity? Just show a small picture. This is so you can see the bullseye maculopathy in this patient. The fluorescein, the fundus picture is not showing the clear-cut images, but the fluorescein is picking up the early stage of bullseye maculopathy. And this is what you're talking about, the thinning of the perifoveal retina. And this a small picture to show what the satellite looks like. So you have the perifoveal thinning of the outer layers, and the central area mimics a satellite. This is what we call a satellite sign. This was one of the questions which came up on YouTube. Probably Syed, you can enumerate the questions and ask to each of the panelists.
I think those questions has not come, I think.
So that's one question for Syed. Syed sir, can you please explain the machine parameters when you are doing orbital USG? For Syed, there's a question on YouTube.
Yeah, the orbital ultrasound almost the same like an ocular ultrasound. Only thing is we have to use para-ocular scans like temporal or axial scans. The parameters almost same settings.
Can I add for that?
Yes, go ahead, Naresh.
So the two important parameters will have to change when you're doing orbital scan is your tissue velocity. Because in case of an ocular scan, we'll be using a tissue velocity of 1532 meters per second. That is the usual tissue velocity. But when you're going to do an orbital scan, you increase the tissue velocity to 1550 meters per second, number one. And number two, when you're going to do an orbital scan, another parameter you have to change is the TVG or the TGC. The time variable gain. So it is like literally the accommodation of eye, because if the TVG is at 0, all the anterior echoes are picked up better. That is the ocular echoes are picked up better. But when you're going to increase the TVG, in fact, in case of an orbital scan, we don't need what's happening. We don't need to see what's happening inside the eye or the eyeball. So we don't need the echoes to be picked that well from the eyeballs. We want the echoes to be picked from the orbital. So you increase your TVG to more than 2 or 2.5. So these are the two parameters you'll have to increase or change while doing an orbital scan. So one is the tissue velocity, the other one is TVG. So the TVG can be 0 and the tissue velocity can be 1532 in case of the ocular scan. And the further TVG, the tissue velocity can be reduced if the eyeball is filled with silicone oil. In case of a silicone oil filled eye, the tissue velocity is around 89 meters per second. So you reduce to less than 1000 in case of a silicon filled eye. So these are the two parameters we'll have to change in the machine while doing. And of course, even in signal, modification. Other thing we'll have to concentrate is what type of amplification we are using. So in case of any mass lesion, it's better to go for a logarithmic than a linear, signal amplification.
One question was, how often do you do screening for HCQ toxicity? Normally, it's anything between 6 months to 1 year. So apart from HD OCT, you have to do your multifocal ERG, the autofluorescence, routine OCT, and then if you can also do the 10-2 HFA also. So we do all these things routinely for following up patients who are on HCQ.
And the dose also matters, sir. In case of hydroxychloroquine, if the cumulative dose of the patient is more than 400 milligram, or in case of chloroquine, if the cumulative dose is more than 1000 milligram, these two parameters, makes the patient 50% more vulnerable for chloroquine toxicity. So if the patient is consuming chloroquine, if the entire consumption over a period of time exceeds 1000 grams or 1 kilogram, or in case of hydroxychloroquine, if it is 400 grams, if the cumulative dose is achieved, the patient will have to compulsorily undergo the screening for hydroxychloroquine. So dose also matters in the case of the screening.
Exactly. A cumulative dose is a very important thing. So normally we take a baseline OCT in the first year or two so that we can compare with the future changes. Very, very rare to get, some people get a sort of allergic reaction and develop maculopathy during the initial phase, but that is very, very unusual. So what is most commonly seen is a cumulative damage due to cumulative dose. So the number of years patient uses also comes into say in this. There are not many more questions on YouTube, but do you have any questions on the chat box, Syed?
Chat box also, there are no questions, sir. Only.
You want to add any questions, Syed?
Thank you.
So for George, do you currently use OCTA angiography to decide your therapy as regards to PDT or anti-VEGF treatment, whether to re-inject? So are you using OCTA criteria to decide on retreatment or to shift to any of these other laser modalities?
Yeah, it's very important because this question is very important because as we saw in the presentation, most of the neovascular membranes can be easily well picked up on the OCT angiography. If you combine, suppose you have a machine, OCT machine with the OCT angiography capability, then the question is whether you really want to do an FFA and ICG angiography for this patient in the first time patient presents to you, or can you start with the anti-VEGF therapy? So to that question, we consider currently other than anti-VEGF therapy, we use in combination of photodynamic therapy mainly for the polypoidal choroidal vasculopathy or a resistant case of CNVM. This is where we use a combination therapy. For this, OCT angiography is not very great for picking up polypoidal lesions because these polyps are low flow lesions which may not be picked up. But so in that setting, if you suspect a polypoidal lesion, then go for fluorescein angiography in combination with ICG angiography. But if it's a straightforward CNVM, wet AMD, or a secondary CNVM, if you have a combination of OCT and OCT angiography, fair enough to start the treatment. And at any time, if you feel treatment resistance or something called PDA, persistent disease activity, despite 3 to 6 anti-VEGF injection, then consider for an FA and ICG angiography. So that is reasonable diagnostic combination to start with, and later switch to ICG if required. Because most of the places in India, the current challenge is absence of ICG angiography machine. So if you have an OCT angiography and you can pick up the, except for the exceptions which we mentioned, mostly we can start the treatment and look for a persistent disease activity or a non-responder where you think in terms of PCV or something like that, where you want ICG angiography.
One more question from Dr. Sriram from Erode, partly which you have answered already, George. What are the conditions where you feel OCT angiography is not enough and you want to do FFA and you feel it is mandatory?
Yeah, so the, mainly PCV is the most commonest condition. RAP lesion is the second, because if you cannot, if it is not responding to anti-VEGF therapy as well. And then third is a persistent disease activity, because 40% of the cases of PCV do not respond only to anti-VEGF therapy. Either you have to switch to the highest anti-VEGF, something like a aflibercept or something like that. That too, patient should be affordable and continuing for a year at least. So these are the indications for doing an ICG angiography.
Question has come. What's your opinion regarding doing OCT angiography in all diabetic patients, and also as a pre-op procedure for cataract surgery? It's for George sir, I think.
No, OCT angiography is not routinely for not required routinely for cataract prior to cataract surgery or diabetic patients. Only the case which, like the case which I showed, OCT is mandatory. Probably now OCT is also becoming mandatory because it could show a subtle edema or subtle cyst. And post cataract surgery, you might feel that that cyst has enlarged, or mostly after cataract surgery, the macular edema progresses. So it is good idea to have a baseline OCT if the patient is diabetic before going and a subtle small NPDR kind of setting. Better to do an OCT prior to cataract surgery. But OCT angiography is required, like in the case which I showed, 6/9 vision, OCT is normal, mild NPDR. So that beautifully shows the macular ischemia. But it is not a routine practice, though macular ischemia is very well picked up with OCT angiography.
Another question is, it's HCQ screening HFA 10-2 or 30-2, which is considered best? One question is.
Yeah, can
you repeat the question?
Like in HCQ screening, which is HFA 10-2 or 30-2 is considered best?
Better is for 10-2 because most of the changes are in the posterior pole itself. So 10-2 will give you a better, what do you call, assessment.
Okay, almost time is long, so I think it's time to wind up our session. And I thank all presenters and speakers for their valuable efforts. And on behalf of Arvind Hospital Tirunelveli, I thank everyone once again. Thank you.